Darcy and Chris met in their second year of college, and their connection wasn't instant, but something that grew over time. Chris was always serious, focused, and determined about his future. He was a finance student who believed in stability, hard work, and planning ahead. On the other hand, Darcy was a literature major, deeply romantic, and full of life. She didn't worry much about the future and preferred to live in the moment, finding beauty in the little things: a rainy day, an old book, or a spontaneous road trip. Their first real interaction happened in the college library, where Chris was buried in his accounting textbook, completely focused on his studies. Darcy, always drawn to interesting people, sat across from him and casually struck up a conversation. At first, Chris found her talkative nature distracting, but there was something about her energy that intrigued him. Over time, what started as simple library conversations turned into long walks around campus, late-night coffee runs, and discussions about life, dreams, and love. Their relationship was a perfect contrast. Darcy brought excitement and adventure into Chris's structured life, while Chris gave Darcy a sense of stability she never knew she needed. By the time they graduated, they were deeply in love and ready to take on the real world together. They moved into a cozy apartment, believing their love was strong enough to handle anything. But real life was different from college, and soon, things began to shift. At first, living together felt like a dream. Waking up next to each other, making breakfast together, and sharing their space was everything they had imagined. But as time passed, the reality of adulthood began to creep in. Chris's finance job demanded long hours, and he was often exhausted when he came home. He was focused on building their future, working late into the night, and thinking about financial security. Darcy, meanwhile, felt the absence of the man she had fallen in love with. She worked at a publishing house, a job she adored, but when she came home in the evenings, she longed for the deep conversations and spontaneous adventures they used to have. Chris was there physically, but emotionally, he seemed distant. Slowly, their relationship began to feel like a routine rather than a romance. Instead of late-night drives and laughter-filled evenings, they found themselves eating dinner in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Darcy tried to talk to Chris about it one night, hoping he would understand. "Chris, do you ever feel like we've lost something?" she asked hesitantly. Chris, tired from work, barely looked up from his laptop. "Lost what?" "Us," she said softly. Chris sighed and set his laptop aside. "Darcy, we're adults now. This is how life works. We have responsibilities." His words felt like a cold reality check. Was this what love was supposed to turn into? A practical partnership rather than an emotional connection? As the days passed, the distance between them only grew. Chris continued to dedicate himself to his job, convinced that he was doing what was best for them. Darcy, feeling more alone than ever, started seeking happiness outside of their relationship. She threw herself into her work, spent more time with her friends, and reignited old passions like writing poetry and reading at cafes. She still loved Chris, but she couldn't ignore the emptiness she felt when she was with him. Every time she tried to bring it up, he would reassure her that things were fine, that they were just adjusting to adulthood. But to Darcy, love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like something slowly fading away. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Chris scrolling through his emails and Darcy staring at the ceiling, she finally said, "Do you even miss me anymore?" Chris looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm right here." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're here, but it doesn't feel like you are." Chris didn't know how to respond. In his mind, he was doing everything right, working hard, providing for their future, being responsible. But in Darcy's heart, something was breaking. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional gap between them widened. Chris was so caught up in his work that he failed to notice how much Darcy was slipping away. She started spending more evenings outside, reading alone at a cafe or walking through the park just to clear her mind. She met new people, not in a romantic way, but people who reminded her of the person she used to be before her relationship became suffocating. She laughed more, felt lighter, and, for the first time in a long time, felt truly seen. Chris, on the other hand, didn't understand why she was pulling away. To him, nothing had changed. He still loved her, still cared about their future. He didn't realize that love wasn't just about staying together, but about truly being present for one another. One night, Darcy came home late and Chris was already asleep. She stood by the bedroom door, watching him, and felt a sharp pain in her chest. She loved him, but she wasn't happy. And that realization scared her more than anything. The tension between them reached its peak when Darcy finally admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't sure if she could keep doing this. One evening, she sat across from Chris at the dinner table, staring at him, trying to find the right words. "Chris," she whispered. He looked up, noticing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I don't know if this is working anymore." Chris froze. "What do you mean?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I love you, but I don't feel loved anymore. I don't feel like we're really together. I feel alone, even when I'm with you." Chris's heart pounded. "Darcy, I don't understand. I've been doing everything for us, for our future. But what about our present?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What's the point of building a future if we're not happy now?" Chris had no answer. He had never thought about it that way. He had been so focused on what was ahead that he had lost sight of what was happening in the moment. That night, they sat in silence, both realizing that love alone wasn't always enough. Something had to change, or they would lose each other forever. After their painful conversation, the atmosphere in their apartment changed. It was no longer filled with warmth, laughter, or even arguments. Instead, it became eerily silent, as if both of them were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Darcy and Chris still lived under the same roof, but they felt like strangers. Chris, for the first time, began noticing the changes in Darcy. She no longer waited for him at dinner, no longer asked about his day, and no longer tried to start deep conversations. She seemed distant, lost in her own world. He wanted to fix things, but he didn't know how. He thought that giving her space might help, but in reality, the space between them only grew wider. Darcy, on the other hand, was exhausted from trying to hold on to a relationship that felt one-sided. She had loved Chris deeply, but love alone wasn't enough to make her happy. She began wondering if she should leave, but the thought of walking away from years of memory scared her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to give up just yet, but she also wasn't sure if she had the strength to keep fighting for something that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. One weekend, Darcy made a sudden decision. She needed to get away, even if just for a little while. Without discussing it with Chris, she packed a small bag and left for her parents' house in the countryside. She didn't leave a note, didn't explain. She just needed space to think. Chris came home that evening to find the apartment unusually quiet. At first, he thought Darcy was just out with friends, but as the hours passed, he realized something was wrong. He called her, but she didn't pick up. Panic set in. Had she really left him? Was this the end? After a few hours, Darcy finally responded with a simple message: "I need some time." Chris stared at the screen, his heart sinking. He had always thought that no matter how tough things got, they would work through it together. But now, Darcy had chosen to walk away, even if temporarily, and that terrified him. Meanwhile, at her parents' house, Darcy found comfort in the quiet, in the familiar embrace of her mother, in the long walks through the fields where she had spent her childhood. She felt free in a way she hadn't in a long time. But she also felt an ache in her heart, because no matter how far she ran, she still loved Chris. The question was, did he still love her enough to fight for her? The days apart made Chris think about everything he had been avoiding. He had always believed that working hard and building a future was the right thing to do, but what was the point of that future if Darcy wasn't in it? He thought about all the times she had reached out to him, all the little signs she had given that he had ignored. He remembered the way she used to light up when they talked about books, the way she used to hold his hand when they walked together. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her, and now he was on the verge of losing her. Chris knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure if it was already too late. After a week, Darcy returned home. She wasn't sure what she would find. Was Chris still waiting for her? Or had he given up? When she walked into the apartment, she found Chris sitting on the couch, looking exhausted and anxious. The moment he saw her, he stood up, unsure of what to say. "I didn't know if you were coming back," he admitted, his voice unsteady. Darcy sighed, setting her bag down. "I didn't know either." A painful silence settled between them. Then, for the first time in a long time, Chris opened up. "I've been so focused on the future that I forgot about the present," he confessed. "I thought I was doing the right thing by working hard, by making sure we were secure. But I didn't see how unhappy you were. I didn't see how much I was hurting you." Tears welled up in Darcy's eyes. "I didn't want security, Chris. I wanted us. I wanted to feel like we were in this together, not just existing side by side." Chris took a deep breath. "I don't want to lose you, Darcy, but I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if you even want me to." Darcy hesitated. She had spent so long feeling unseen, unheard. But hearing Chris say these things, acknowledging what she had been feeling, gave her a small glimmer of hope. "I don't know either," she admitted, "but I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Trying wasn't easy. It meant unlearning old habits, making time for each other, and rebuilding their relationship from the ground up. Chris started leaving work earlier, making sure he was present, not just physically, but emotionally. Darcy, in return, tried to open up again, to let herself believe that things could be different. They went on walks together, had deep conversations like they used to, and rediscovered the little things that had made them fall in love in the first place. But it wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when Darcy wondered if they were just delaying the inevitable. One night, as they sat on their balcony, Chris reached for Darcy's hand. "I know I can't erase the past," he said, "but I want to be better. Not just for you, but for us." Darcy looked at him, searching his eyes for sincerity. And for the first time in a long time, she saw the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had always been there, just buried under the weight of responsibilities. Maybe this wasn't a perfect love story. Maybe it never would be. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. Even though both Darcy and Chris had agreed to try, reality proved that rebuilding a relationship wasn't as simple as a promise. The first few weeks were filled with effort, but also frustration. They were both unlearning habits that had driven them apart, and at times it felt overwhelming. Chris, despite his best intentions, sometimes slipped back into his old ways, staying late at work, checking his phone too often, or getting lost in his thoughts instead of being present. Darcy, though willing to give him a chance, struggled with her own fears. Every time Chris seemed distracted, she wondered if they were just delaying the inevitable. She didn't want to go back to feeling invisible again. One evening, after a long day at work, Chris came home late. He had promised to be back for dinner, but as usual, work had taken longer than expected. When he walked in, he saw Darcy sitting at the table, the food untouched, her expression unreadable. "You said you'd be here," she said quietly. Chris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Darcy. I got caught up." "That's always the excuse," she cut in. "You say you want to change, but nothing really changes." Her words hit him hard. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he was trying, but deep down, he knew she was right. He wasn't doing enough. "Darcy, I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to balance everything." She looked at him, her eyes filled with both love and exhaustion. "Then maybe we should stop trying," she said, her voice breaking. Chris felt a sharp pain in his chest. "Is that really what you want?" Darcy shook her head. "No, but I can't do this alone." For the first time, Chris truly understood. This wasn't just about effort. It was about consistency, about proving through actions that she mattered, that their relationship mattered. After that night, Chris made a real effort to change, not just in words, but in actions. He started setting boundaries at work, making sure he was home on time. He planned small surprises for Darcy, like bringing her favorite coffee or leaving her notes reminding her how much she meant to him. They started going on regular date nights, reliving the moments that had once made them happy. Darcy, in return, let go of some of her resentment. She allowed herself to believe in their progress, even if it was slow. She saw Chris genuinely trying, and that meant more to her than grand gestures ever could. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching an old movie, Chris turned to Darcy. "I know I haven't always been the best partner," he admitted, "but I want you to know that I see you now. And I love you." Darcy looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I never stopped loving you, Chris. I just needed to feel like I mattered." Chris took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You do. More than anything." It was a simple moment, but in that silence, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, Darcy felt hope. Just as things seemed to be improving, life threw another challenge their way. Chris was offered a big promotion at work, one that would secure their financial future, but would demand even more of his time. When he told Darcy about it, she felt her stomach drop. "It's a great opportunity," Chris said carefully, "but I don't want to take it if it means losing what we've rebuilt." Darcy appreciated that he was considering her, but she couldn't help feeling conflicted. "I don't want to hold you back, Chris. I know how hard you've worked for this. But at what cost?" he asked. "If taking this job means going back to how things were, then it's not worth it." Darcy stared at him, surprised. A few months ago, Chris wouldn't have hesitated to take the promotion. But now, he was choosing them. "We'll figure it out together," she said softly. For the first time in a long time, Chris and Darcy truly felt like a team. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were finally fighting with each other, not against each other's. Chris and Darcy had reached a delicate balance in their relationship. The past few months had been filled with small victories, Chris proving through consistent actions that he was committed, Darcy allowing herself to trust him again, and both of them making space for each other in ways they never had before. Yet, just when it seemed like they had figured it out, life presented them with another challenge. The promotion that Chris had been offered wasn't just any opportunity, it was the kind of career move that could change everything for him. It came with a significant salary increase, a higher position, and the respect he had been working toward for years. However, it also came with a cost: longer hours, more responsibilities, and possibly traveling for extended periods. One evening, as they sat together in the dimly lit living room, Chris finally voiced what had been weighing on his mind. "I need to give them my answer by next week," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an unspoken tension beneath his words. Darcy curled her legs under herself, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. "And what do you want to do?" she asked. Chris exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "I want to say yes. It's everything I've worked for." The honesty stung. Darcy wanted to be the kind of partner who encouraged his dreams, but she also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. "And what about us?" she asked softly. Chris hesitated. "That's what I'm afraid of. I don't want to lose what we've built. I don't want to go back to the way things were." Darcy studied his face, looking for an answer in his eyes. "Then why does it feel like we're standing at the edge of that same mistake?" Chris reached for her hand. "Because I don't know how to have both." That was the truth neither of them wanted to face. They had spent so much time trying to repair their relationship that they hadn't considered what would happen when life forced them to make choices. Could love and ambition truly coexist? Or would one always have to suffer for the other to thrive? The days that followed were filled with silent contemplation. Chris buried himself in work, weighing the pros and cons, while Darcy found herself retreating into her thoughts, wondering if she was being selfish for wanting him to stay. They avoided deep conversations, both afraid of what the other might say. One evening, Darcy decided she couldn't keep running from the conversation. She waited for Chris to come home, determined to finally say what was in her heart. When he walked through the door, exhaustion evident in his posture, she took a deep breath. "Chris, we need to talk." He nodded, already knowing what was coming. "If you take this job, I won't stop you," she said. "But I need to know, are you taking it for us or for yourself?" Chris looked at her, and for a moment, he was silent. Then he admitted, "For myself." The honesty was painful but necessary. Darcy nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Then I need to figure out if that's something I can live with. Her words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Chris reached for her, but she pulled away gently. I need time to think, she said before walking away, leaving Chris alone with the weight of his decision. Days passed, and Darcy found herself caught between love and self-preservation. She loved Chris. There was no doubt about that. But was love enough? Could she stand by and watch him choose a life that would inevitably pull him away from her again? Chris, too, was struggling. He wanted the promotion, but he also wanted Darcy. For the first time, he wondered if his definition of success had been all wrong. Was achievement really worth it if he had no one to share it with? One evening, as they sat in silence at the dinner table, Chris finally broke. I declined the promotion. Darcy looked up, shock evident in her expression. Chris took a deep breath. I turned it down. I couldn't do it, Darcy. Not if it meant losing you. Tears welled in Darcy's eyes. Chris, are you sure? He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. I spent so many years thinking that my career was the most important thing. But these past few months have shown me that none of it matters if I don't have you. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I built a successful life, but lost the person who made it worth living. Darcy's heart swelled with emotion. She had spent so much time fearing that he would always choose work over her, but in this moment, he was proving that she mattered, that they mattered. She squeezed his hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. I love you, Chris. He smiled, relief washing over his face. I love you too. And I promise, from now on, my choices will always include you. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just surviving, they were truly living together. And that was all that mattered.